fantastic to have you join us, Sylvie. It's lovely to see you again.
I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So I have a few questions for you, and then I'll pass it off to Christina, and then she'll pass it back to me.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Okay, so these questions center on the writing experience. Our first question is, you identify as a neurodivergent author. In fact, one note in your query, which immediately interested me, was that you shared the same experience with anxiety disorders as your protagonist, E, in A Letter to the Luminous Deep. As a reminder, or for anyone who hasn't read Luminous Deep, may I ask exactly what you're referring to when you speak to your own neurodivergence and to neurodivergence in general? What is it and how does it manifest in you?
Yes. So, first question. I can do this. Okay. Um, it's it's interesting that you bring up that query description, Natasha, because that was actually something that I really uh, thought over, pondered, disputed with myself for a long period of time because it's very vulnerable to suddenly be contacting unknown people and saying, "Hey, here's some like very personal medical information about me. Enjoy." And add that to the already very intense anxiety of querying in the first place and sending something you've made out into the world. So I really didn't know whether or not I should put that in. I'm glad I did because clearly it helped me connect with the right people. But I think my thought process there was that there is such a kind of pervasive myth of this sort of romantic recluse figure who's just mysteriously withdrawn from the world and no one knows why, which has spawned many wonderful stories. But in this case, I wanted it to be clear to whoever was going to represent this book that this was a slightly different take on that one that was very much rooted in my personal experience. And though, again, it's as nerve wracking to say this publicly as it was to say this in my query letters back in the day, I am a person who lives with OCD. I'm also autistic. Those two overlap in a lot of different ways. They've had various effects upon my life, including experiencing periods of intense agoraphobia and still not being exceptionally great at being in public spaces or large crowded spaces. And this is such a big part of my life and my experience that I really can't imagine being able to write something that doesn't reflect that. But especially since this was my first novel, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to kind of explore that in a different way through my character E and through other characters in the Sunken Archive as well who have their own personal experiences with this. I can only really speak to my own experience of neurodivergence because it's kind of a new term for me and one that I have adopted for myself, mostly because I think it very effectively sends a message across about where I'm coming from and how I'm thinking, but it doesn't require me to say, I have this type of autism or like I have this sort of thing. Like I don't have to, I can, um, the lack of extreme specificity, especially when I'm dealing with the public or dealing with people who I don't know, it's easier for me to just say I'm neurodivergent and in the hopes that that will express that there is something different about the way in which I process the world, the way I think, the way that I experience things. And it's something that is inherently part of me and something that I cannot change. The way I think the OCD piece of it is more of an adversarial relationship because there are so many aspects of it that make my life so very difficult that I don't really want like there are a lot of things about living with OCD that I wish that I could cure. But when it comes to the aspects of myself that come from being an autistic person, I don't want to get rid of those because that's how I am. That's like the person who I am. Whereas if I could just go a few days without constantly checking things, that would be really awesome. But I'm working on that. So there is my long answer to your question.
That's wonderful. I want to say two things really quickly before we move on to the next question. The first is that in terms of speaking to greater truths in a way that's comfortable for you and that sort of thing. Fiction is a great avenue for that, and so I think you found like the perfect medium, and you've accomplished it so well. The other thing is, I want to applaud you for your vulnerability. I think like the fact that it was a challenge for you to share that medical information, as you said, in your query, is also really bold and authentic. And you know, I think people are drawn to that. At least I was, right? And I think that comes through in your writing. And certainly when you're talking right now, I'm just like, oh my gosh, you're so cool. But yeah, I think that's really cool and authentic. And you know, I, at least for me, it helped me to see myself and my experiences validated as well when I read your work, and have had the chance to, you know, build a relationship with you. So you, in being vulnerable, have supported others to be brave as well. So thank you for that. Okay, to an extent, how we manage or experience our disorders or conditions will be different from how others manage or experience theirs. That said, there's obviously great comfort and validation in what is universal about those experiences. Beyond the similarities you've beautifully imbued in E and other characters, I'm curious as to what else your experiences with OCD and autism, agoraphobia, have brought to your writing. How has neurodivergence influenced your creative process?
I mean, I'm going to try to focus on some of the more more positive things here, and I know that it's all part of the whole experience, but I would say that it's it's been very interesting for me to experiment more with writing, and especially with writing other characters who don't have the same way of experiencing the world that I have, and trying to figure out like what do other people do and think, and like what is the response to this scenario that somebody would have if they weren't me and didn't experience things the way that I do. I often have asked my partner for assistance in like, hey, what do you think about this character's motivations? Or what do you think about the emotions here? Is this something that someone would do for a non-compulsive reason? Is something that very frequently I have to check in on. I think that because I'm writing in a genre that has, I don't know, a lot of dramatic characters, let's say. I it works to some extent. I could give a whole lecture about this honestly, but I sort of have this thought that there are a lot of traits that I associate with my experience of OCD that fictional characters experience because they're fictional characters and everything they do is bigger and louder and like magnified compared to what uh the general public might experience. So I might see one of those characters and think, wow, that's actually just a normal day with OCD, when actually it's this like very exaggerated sense of emotions and motivations. And because of that, I feel like generally people wouldn't necessarily notice the difference in the way that I'm writing my characters unless they're specifically looking for it, or so I hope. I don't know. Um, but I would say that it's very difficult for me to consider writing a book that doesn't have neurodivergence as one of its themes or context at the very least. I think I prefer context rather than theme, because that suggests that the book is about like that specific experience rather than it being a story in which people who are neurodivergent in some way do other things. And of course, like you can't separate it because I will always be doing things within the context of being autistic and having OCD, but at the same time, not everything I do is about it. And I think I'll probably talk more about this later. But I think that's sort of how I've been trying to conceptualize it.
Are there specific writing habits, tools, or strategies that have helped you work with your neurodivergence, rather than against it?
Yes. One of the things that I struggle with specifically from the OCD side is revising and editing and finishing things, which I know many authors struggle with in many different ways. And it's always so tempting to be like, oh, but actually there's like 15 more things that I want to go change. And I've just thought about it now at 12:30 a.m. after I just submitted my final draft. But in my case, like it can really get out of control very quickly. And I have had to like figure out ways to distinguish between actual like writer behaviors, things that are important. Like I like to turn in a clean manuscript and make sure that everything is the way that I want it to be, more or less. But at the same time, I really don't need to do like 10 full read-throughs on the day before something is due, because I'm not really accomplishing anything. And one of the things I discovered in my early experience with the publishing process of A Letter to the Luminous Deep is when I reached stages further along, like reviewing the copy edit and reviewing the final proofs, I would sometimes in my first pass like mark a bunch of stuff, and then I'd go back and be like, oh, actually, this was fine. I don't know why I thought this was so wrong. And then I'd undo it all again. And then I'd do it once more. And this consumed a great deal of time and ultimately produced the same manuscript that it would if I hadn't done any of those things in the first place. So my number one strategy at the moment is I keep a very specific writing schedule. I love routines, I love schedules and planning documents. And when I have, for example, Natasha knows, I turned in a manuscript last week. When I'm preparing for something like that, it's like, okay, this day I'm gonna read it twice. And then the next day, I'm just going to read all of the like markup red bits where I know that I edited, and that's going to be the final thing because I know I changed all those. And making a clear map of what I'm doing has been extremely helpful, because then I remind myself, okay, this is the list. It's fine. We're going to follow the list. Sometimes then the list itself gets out of control a little bit. It's not a perfect system, but I'm doing my best. I also find that sometimes, so this is an extremely specific thing, but people might find it interesting. I sometimes have obsessions and compulsions related to the number of times that certain words appear in my manuscript. Hooray, what a wonderful, unhelpful thing. And this is extremely frustrating because often like I will find myself at the last minute like looking up how many times I used one particular phrase, be like, okay, this one is 10 pages away from the last time I used that word, so now I need to think of something other than delightful, but what else can I say other than delightful? And again, like I think there is a lot to be gained as a writer from reviewing your work and making stylistic changes. But also I am becoming better and better at recognizing when that's a writerly thought and when it's a product of OCD style thinking. I find that one of the things that works really well for me and the way my brain works is that I have very strong like pattern recognition for words and things. I'm not good with numbers, but like words and memorization I'm fantastic at. This was a great boon when I was memorizing poetry as a child, and continues to be very helpful in the context of writing, because when I have insomnia and can't sleep, as I so often can't, I will write scenes in my head, and then in the morning I remember them completely and I just go and like throw them into my document. And that's actually how I do a lot of my drafting. And I think that's like an example of something that I think is kind of cool about my brain. It's like, okay, this is a bit much. Maybe you should actually be sleeping and not writing novels in your brain, because that's probably not helping you fall back to sleep, but it's cool and I like it. And like that's something about my process that I actually enjoy.
Yes. The silver linings of OCD. I found that part of my healing with OCD, because I've had a crazy journey with it too, has been really coming to be super, super grateful for what it does bring to my creative process in my own writing, because it feels to me that, you know, in the good times, at least in my experience, the pros can outweigh the cons in terms of the beautiful kind of creativity and sculpting. And that thing about the words, I get that so much about like, oh, I used delightful 10 pages 10 pages ago. That makes me cry laugh. Oh my God. But I think that's really important to highlight. And I think that that's just another example of you validating experience, because yes, we all have different experiences with it, but it's true. There are moments that are that are super hard, but I just want to highlight too, like, it's cool that from my experience reading your work and moving through edits with you, which has been just extraordinary. I've seen the ways in which your mind has created something so beautiful, not just in terms of your imagination, but also in terms of how it approaches sculpting it after the fact, which I think is something to celebrate. And like, yeah, we humans do not know the depths of the unknown universe that is our minds. But those little colorful bits are really fascinating. Okay, next question.
I was gonna say, when I pull up the word report on my manuscripts, like I cringe. I cringe when I see how often I've used the word just, and have to go back and like remove, 89% of them. So yeah, I understand the delightful predicament of delightful.
Have you ever felt pressure to conform to neurotypical expectations in writing or publishing? And if so, how have you handled that?
Absolutely, yes, is my obvious answer there. And I wouldn't even necessarily say that this pressure has come from any specific person or institution, rather than just sort of my own self-imposed pressure to feel like I need to be doing the author things in an author way, and really struggling with the fact that I'm actually really not cut out to do a lot of those things, and they're not they're not super great for me. One of the things, as you know, that really gets to me is social media, which like sets off my OCD in absolutely, like, I don't know, indescribable ways, let's just say. I won't even attempt to describe it. And when I first started on this journey, I kind of thought, okay, I'm going to like, I'll just casually post things sometimes. There's nothing wrong with that. It's fine. You're trying to connect with readers. And then over time, as this continued to just like make me feel terrible, then it was like, all right, what if the Instagram just lives on my partner's phone and we just do it together and I don't have to like have unfettered access to it? And it still doesn't really work for me. And I think that, like, again, no one is telling me that I must go on social media or I will like lose my author title or something like that. But it's part of what authors often do today. And for me, it's a place where I feel not only sort of this overwhelming feeling of like, oh no, this is going to make me go into like a 4-day nightmare spiral of OCD symptoms after posting one thing on Instagram. But also this weird balance that I find very hard to navigate between being open about how difficult things are for me and then also having this internal fear that people will think, oh no, she just talks about like OCD all the time. She's just complaining about her OCD constantly. We know you have OCD. And it's like, I, but when I don't talk about it, then it feels like this weird facade of a person who's like, oh, actually, I'm having a wonderful time being a writer, and I just never have once struggled with the experience of being in the public eye. And like that also is difficult for me to say. So I don't know. I've thought about it a lot, and like, obviously, I am incredibly grateful and delighted and overwhelmed that I have had the opportunity to be an author in the first place, which is amazing. But I think something that I often think about is this idea for myself of accessibility versus like compatibility, because obviously like I certainly think that people who find that they need accommodations to help them experience something like being an author should be accommodated. And for me, I'm also like, but okay, I shouldn't be stopped from being an author because I'm autistic and have OCD, but like, is it actually a good fit for me personally? Like, is it good for my health to be doing this? clearly I'm still like debating that one for myself. But I think that trying to acknowledge to myself that I'm just doing things my own way and remembering that it's actually okay to tell this to people and to ask for help. I've only done a few in-person events, but at these events, I have been astonished by how just saying even the slightest hint of what I'm feeling or how difficult it is for me to have conversation with people has been enough to, like, I don't know, unlock this this wealth of kindness that people have shown me, and I've been very grateful for that, whether it's something like, hey, actually, I see that you really look freaked out. Maybe we can put you on the very end table for this signing so that you don't have to be in the middle of a bunch of people talking. Like things like that I have really appreciated. And I'm also reminding myself that the reason why many people connect to and relate to my book in the first place is because they might share some of these experiences for me. So maybe they're not surprised when this person who wrote a book about someone who only writes letters and rarely leaves her home, like, cannot handle a dinner after an event or something because I'm going to have to talk to people, and there's only so much conversational analysis that I can engage in when I've already been like doing a presentation at the same time. So I don't know. I think my conclusion is that I still feel this pressure. I don't think that's anyone's fault, but I am working to figure out how to like make this work for me.
And I think that's very true. Like, I think in general, when we try something and do something, new, we want to do all the things and have all the experiences, and everyone makes it look so effortless and easy and good. And you're like, this is awful. I'm not a social media person. That was after my, my age group. That was like, I was already in university when that stuff was starting. So I was less into it. And I still feel the pressure to have to use it. And it feels awful. It feels awful to use it, to do it. I don't like it. So I completely understand that push-pull relationship that we can have with those types of activities. So thank you for sharing.
And just like from an agent's perspective, there are differing opinions on it. Like there are people who believe that authors should have all the things and do TikTok or, well, as much as they can, Instagram and all that stuff. I am odd in that I don't think that it's, anyways, it's a rabbit hole. But for me, the story comes first always. And if it's a good story, it's going to sell. And so that's what I think. And I think that authors have had different approaches to their experiences with writing, obviously, for centuries, and their experiences with publicity for centuries. And there's a sort of this is a tangent, and I'll stop it really quickly, I promise. But with social media, there's an expectation, as you alluded to, Sylvie, of sort of having this. You're presenting a character of yourself. You're trying to be authentically you because that's what everybody wants. But at the end of the day, it is a screen, and you will always be in someone else's head as their perception of you, even whilst you are yourself and know only the things you can know about yourself and try to be authentically you as possible. But there's that odd connection thing over platforms that are often all about, let's talk about how awesome I am, and let's promote my book, and let's do this and this and this. And that's, that works for some people for sure. And it is definitely part of the machine and the industry nowadays. But I don't think it should be necessary for everybody. And particularly when a lot of people who have really beautiful stories to tell are not super, super into being a part of that. But yeah, that's my spicy take on it today, and I'll move on. Thank you. That was an awesome answer. Okay, given you've one book published already and another on the way, how has your relationship with your writing as a neurodivergent author changed over time? You kind of touched on this a little bit, but if so, in what ways?
Yeah, so I guess I just talked about all the struggles. I can talk about some of the nice things. I feel like as a writer, I have become even more confident in expressing the weird specificity of the stories that I want to tell. I am enjoying the fact that actually, this very strange epistolary novel that I kind of just wrote because that it had all the things in it that I like has actually appealed to other people. It's just astonishing that other people could like this and be interested in this. And I think sort of pushed on by that, it's like, okay, you know what? I've got lots of more weirdly specific stories where that one came from. And I feel like I'm very excited about what I've done with the second book in the Sunken Archive. I feel like it's very I can see myself sort of growing as an author in terms of how I am telling my stories and how I'm putting myself into them. And my next series, I am extremely excited about and really do feel like that also expresses some very specific parts of myself and my interests and myself as an autistic person in the case of the first book in this series. So that's a kind of a new thing for me to be exploring in these books, and I'm excited about it. And I don't know. That's something I feel really good about.
So let's talk about the Sunken Archive a little bit. Can you talk a little bit about your writing experience from the Sunken Archive? Why was it important to you to represent OCD and agoraphobia in your work?
So the funny thing is that actually when I started writing this book, it was not specifically going to be about OCD. At least, okay, let me walk this back. It kind of it was not going to be about OCD in a way that I wanted people to recognize. There we go. That's what I meant. It was a book that was based on a lot of things. My own experience, the extreme isolation that I felt during this period in my life. I started writing this book in 2018, which I always like to like bring out as this kind of amazing fact because then I started submitting it, querying it to agents in 2022, I believe. So there was a long period of working on this book. And when I was first writing it, I didn't expect to use the character of E to literally represent a lot of very specific things about my OCD. I thought it was going to be a bit more general. And honestly, part of that was by design because I really didn't want to put that out there in such a way. And my desire to hide that and conceal it actually took some very interesting turns because as a few kindred souls of mine have noticed, there are a lot of Emily Dickinson references in A Letter to the Luminous Deep, like extremely specific references to her home and her life in Amherst, Massachusetts. This is not a book about Emily Dickinson, obviously, because we all know Emily Dickinson famously did not live underwater and do all these various things. Um, but at the time, because this was a time in my life when I was studying Emily Dickinson, engaging with her work a lot because of my job, I was like, okay, well, if this is just like full of Emily Dickinson Easter eggs, no one will think, wow, this must be about her specific experience of mental illness, her being me in this case, not Emily Dickinson. And in a way that helped to shield me from the vulnerability I felt in putting it out there. But then in the end, I ultimately decided to make the OCD much more explicit and obvious and also own it for myself. So I kind of just ended up with a bunch of bonus Emily Dickinson references on top of it.
And as of yet, I've not seen any proof that she has not lived underwater, just to be clear.
Hmm.
So entirely still possible. Um, were there any parts of the book that were difficult to write because it comes from this really personal place and personal way that you see the world and experience it?
Yes, I would say that the epistolary nature of the book made scenes where E is experiencing her obsessive thoughts when she's ruminating, when she's doing compulsive activities, like that was very difficult to write because it was different than if I had been writing from a third person perspective. It was someone who is like actively experiencing these things and it's being captured on paper, and maybe she doesn't even fully realize that it's being captured on paper, but like this is what she then will be sending to her sister or to her very charming correspondent or so forth. And it was hard because, like, obviously, I wanted it to be authentic, and I specifically wanted it to be authentic to my experience as someone who has different subtypes of OCD that are not related to cleaning compulsions, because that's while that is a perfectly like common form of OCD that many people do struggle with, there's also many different subtypes of OCD. Anyway, Natasha knows this is a big thing of mine. So in my desire to have this genuine specificity, it also meant like, oh, yeah, this is just a thing I have actually experienced myself, and in writing it, I'm sort of feeling all those emotions again. And it's terrifying to think that someone would read this and be like, wow, is that actually what she's going through all the time? Because they're things that I really don't want people to know about publicly. But I will say that though I've really enjoyed that aspect of the Sunken Archive, I'm also glad that my next series will be taking a slightly different approach to these kinds of things, because it was very intense to do this in such a personal and straightforward fashion across these two books and countless letters.
No, I bet. I think it's something a lot of writers struggle with in all kinds of scenarios, whether they're writing a very emotional scene, they themselves are experiencing that emotion, and how do you sort of deal with the after? Like, how do you kind of self-soothe yourself after writing something very difficult or personal, or people who write memoirs about traumatic experiences? So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm always curious where inspiration comes from. So what inspired you to write The Sunken Archive?
Yes, so I've already talked about Emily Dickinson, who's a little bit like on the margins of this, but really this book sort of emerged from like this image in my head of this underwater house. So curiously, like the house came first, the idea of this Victorian style house that's just like among the coral in a very colorful and beautiful way was like, oh yes, this is the story I wanted to write. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is I love epistolary novels, and I have always wanted to write one. And when I sat down to write this, it was in the context of, okay, I'm going to write this draft. I have no idea what this story is going to be. This is before I did outlines. I now do outlines, and I love outlines. But at the time, I was just like, okay, let's just discover this world. I know nothing about it. Let me just write some letters and see what happens. That draft ended up being ultimately very different than the many drafts that followed it. But it also drew upon a lot of things that I found very interesting. Again, not to just bring Emily Dickinson back into everything, but part of what I found so relatable about Emily Dickinson and her experience is that many people think of her as somebody who lived in utter isolation and never communicated with anyone and just wrote poems all day. And while it's certainly true that her like sphere of leaving her house and eventually her room like reduced as she grew older, she wrote tons of letters, and like we are able to read her letters because the letters that she sent to people, many of those correspondents saved her letters. And so we have access to those. We don't generally have access to the letters she received because her sister burned those letters, which was the poet's wish after she died. So thinking about this and this idea of like, okay, how can having just a few fragments of correspondence affect the way a story is told? And then that's what made me imagine this idea of we're trying to solve a mystery. One person has one half of the letters, the other person has the other half of the letters, and like maybe they're going to meet up and start figuring things out together. And I think that like there are so many different like inspirations for this, but structurally, I would say like this idea of being an archivist, of piecing together somebody's life from these little bits they've left behind, and acknowledging that you actually probably won't know the full story most of the time. In fact, I would say that Byron and Sophie are quite lucky in that they end up finding out most of the stuff. But that's not always how it works, and sort of exploring that in the context of a sibling dynamic was also something I was very interested in.
I love that. I love when this tiny little piece of inspiration then becomes this bigger and bigger idea. So I know that books can be remarkable tools for understanding and compassion. And there's even been studies out there about how children who read certain series or certain books, I won't name them all because I'll get them wrong, but I've read about these studies, and what they've noticed is children who did read those books versus children who didn't. Those who did read them had more compassion and understanding and empathy for other children, no matter what the situation might be, versus those who didn't read books with those kinds of topics and themes and messages. So if there's any messages that you hope Luminous Deep or Lonesome Shore convey about the experience of living with OCD, or any other message that you wish to send, what would that be, if any?
When I've sort of answered similar questions before, I think I always come back to the idea of wanting people to feel a little bit less alone and to remember or reconnect with their capacity for wonder, even despite whatever challenges they might be facing in their day-to-day lives, because that's something that I always want to internalize for myself and am still working on, honestly. But if the greatest thing that my book could do is make somebody who has OCD feel like, hey, wow, you know, I feel just like 0.5% happier, feeling like there's someone out there who understands what I'm going through, even if it's not exactly the same as my own experience. That would be something that's very meaningful to me, because it, like all different mental health conditions, it can be very isolating to have OCD. I think particularly because certain subtypes of it involve like having really terrible thoughts that you don't want to talk about and you don't want people to know about, because like that, it makes you feel like you're a terrible person. And so it's something that you really feel needs to be hidden. And I hope that like the representation of someone who is experiencing these specific things in my book might be something that brings a little bit of comfort or a feeling of connection to my readers.
Yeah, thank you, just by the way, Sylvie, for touching on that last thing, because also as someone who experiences OCD that way, I know talking about that, even at least from me, I'm like, if I share that, like
Yep.
that I have those sort of thoughts, what are people gonna think? You know, like I really appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability there too, because you're already doing it. You're already inspiring. I've actually to many people, I've called Luminous Deep, a letter to the Luminous Deep, sorry, hope punk, because of how much hope fills within you with each turning of each page, even like each chapter. And I said this to you quite recently, but I smile a lot when I read your work. And it is incredibly validating and really, really hopeful, hope-filled, and just beautiful. So yeah, this next section, last section, is on moving forward. And I will start with why is it important for neurodiverse authors to see their books published?
I think that seeing, I mean, this goes for a variety of different spheres, not just neurodivergence, but like being able to find books that you connect with and that you feel represent yourself is a very important feeling. I think that it can be, in my experience, it's especially hard as somebody who feels like, again, very isolated, very different, to think that my book could be something that a truly, in my mind, unfathomable number of people have now read is like very strange to me. And I think that it's an opportunity, going back to my favorite thing to say, which is connection, which is very funny since as an autistic person, I'm actually really bad at like making and maintaining connections, but whatever. I feel like it's important to like feel that if being a writer is something that you want to do and you want to share those stories, that there will be people out there who understand and get and are grateful for your books existing, even though you feel like they are so in tune to your specific experience that nobody would be able to understand, that actually there's a lot more interest and sympathy and compassion and that it's and seeing books where that is represented is a great way to feel more comfortable about pursuing your own stories.
And so, yes, I will jump to what should neurodivergent authors know about navigating the publishing industry?
Oh no, it's my my depressing answer. No, I'm not gonna make it be depressing. I'm gonna make it be good. I think that I don't know. Again, just speaking from my own experience, it has been a lot harder than I think anyone would have expected because to many people, people who I'm close to even, they think, "Oh yeah, you're living your dream. Like you've gotten a book published. Isn't that wonderful? Like everything is amazing." And yes, it is wonderful and amazing and I'm so grateful, etc. But at the same time, like it's really hard. And I guess the message I want to convey is it's okay if it's really hard. Like it's really hard for me too. And I think that just knowing that it's actually okay if you're struggling with many aspects of it or that you feel like actually you're so busy being overwhelmed by like the amount of energy and effort and like dealing with things in your brain it takes for you to just live that you feel like you're neglecting these career building things as a writer, like that's okay too. I often feel like, especially with social media, it's like I feel like I should be posting on social media to promote advocacy about OCD and about things that I care about, but I'm too busy having OCD to be an advocate for OCD. And it's like it's sad, but it's true. Like there's so many things that occupy my time and energy that I have to be like, it's okay. I am doing my best in the best that I can to be an author, and that's all I can do. So I guess that's my my
That's
word.
good enough, right? And then that's good enough. So many authors that I work with through Agents Helping Writers, it's trying to get them to focus on the journey of being a writer rather than the destination, because although you're going to experience great joy and satisfaction and gratitude and all these things about seeing your book at a bookstore, it's not going to last super long. And not because the book isn't good or anything like that. It's just that feeling of like, woohoo, I did it. I got my book on a shelf. And now I need to write the next one and the next one. And that's going to take me 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 2 years, whatever. So I think just sometimes doing what you're doing is good enough and being happy with that process. So I think what you're bringing up is so so incredibly honest about what it feels like, because you're too busy living to, think about other things or existing or whatever the case, to do all of the things. And doing all of the things is impossible, no matter how many TikTok videos you watch, about how to do it. I still haven't figured out how to do all of the things, so I have to pick and choose. But thank you. Natasha?
Yeah, such a great thing to point out, and thank you all again for being so authentic there. I agree, and I agree with you too, Christina. Life is so much about ebbs and flows and the waves that we ride. Oh, good water puns, yes. Ocean puns, but we are going to have a lot of highs in our life and a lot of lows, and navigating anything in, I think, a mature capacity is understanding that it's not all the time going to be this beautiful, glorious, radiant, yes, I'm published, I'm on the shelf. Although I truly believe those moments need to be celebrated when you're in those highs because they're so wonderful. But as you said, Christina, like the true beauty of this journey as an author, and at least this is something I try to impart upon my authors, is that it is the journey that matters, and it's your creative journey, your journey as a human. This job is you wearing your heart on your sleeve and sharing it with the world, as you've basically explained throughout this whole interview. And that's incredibly real and brave and challenging. And that goes for you, Christina, as well as an author, and any authors who are watching this. This is something it's a very challenging career in general, because you are wearing your heart out there. Enjoy the process and enjoy every moment, but you're human and you're allowed to navigate it how you need to navigate it, and that's totally valid. And I really appreciate your honesty with that, Sylvie. Thank you.
Something when I work with writers about setting their goals for their project is reminding them you're not going to wake up as superhuman every day. You're going to get sick some days, you're going to have a terrible cold, you're going to get COVID, like whatever's going to happen, you're just going to feel like crap that day and not want to do anything. So don't plan every day of your project as if you're waking up with superhuman strength every single day. It's just not going to happen. Whether we want to believe that or not, your kids are going to get sick. You're going to have a meeting that makes you stay late at work. Like, it's going to derail your routine almost every day, something in life. And so it's planning around those ebbs and flows that you were talking about, Natasha, and just doing good enough.
Okay, Sylvie. I believe we have 2 final questions for you. Oh, this is an interesting one. What do you wish more people understood about OCD and autism and agoraphobia, if you'd like to share?
Yes. I don't know. Maybe I'll just focus on the OCD for now, since that's like my primary platform. I, as somebody who has lived with OCD for pretty much all of my life, I'm quite sure, but was not diagnosed till my mid-20s, which is now several years ago. I think that I'm very passionate about people understanding the various forms that OCD can take, because it's such a strangely, I keep using the phrase strangely specific, but I feel like it just describes me and OCD and a lot of other things very well. When I was struggling with my obsessions and compulsions and not knowing what they were terrifying, as they must be. They also felt like they were just weird things that I did that had no explanation. And when I got my diagnosis and started learning more about the different types of OCD, because like many people, I thought, oh, it means that you need to keep things clean and orderly, and part of this is because of the co-opting of so OCD kind of like into the lexicon, and using it in such a light way that truly does not actually capture the experience of what can be, and is, in my experience, like a very debilitating and life-limiting condition at times. So yes, I I would love if people knew that there are many different types of OCD, and there are lots of different experiences that people have with OCD, and that it gets treated in a different way than just generalized anxiety disorder, which is what I was misdiagnosed with for a while. And like it's a whole different thing. It has different treatment options. There, at least in my experience, is no magical cure for it, but like there are ways that you can figure out how to make your life a little bit easier, as long as you know what you're working with. And I personally found it extremely validating to learn, like, wait a minute, this incredibly specific, there we go again, thing that I did is like something that everyone else who has this type of OCD also does. It's like, wow, okay, that's astonishing. So yes.
That's awesome. And I am all for strangely or incredibly specific being a wonderful descriptor. Thank you for that. Okay. Final question for you today, and thank you again. And Christina, feel free to jump in too. Like, I really appreciate you coming here for us today, Sylvie. So generous to offer your time. But last question is, do you have any other thoughts about neurodivergence and writing, or a particular message you'd like to share with writers and creatives who may share similar experiences as you?
I don't know. I guess as sort of a sign of what is going on here, I wanted to say that I typically, as part of my process, if I'm going to an event or doing an interview, I always completely script everything in advance, memorize the script, and then recite it. I also create a spreadsheet of all the potential questions I imagine I might be asked in a Q&A session, and I memorize the answers to those questions too. This is also something that I do when like going to have casual conversations with people. It's fine. This is just, this is just how things work for me. However, with all that said, today, in an attempt to represent my experience as a neurodivergent author more authentically, I have only lightly scripted these answers, which you could probably tell because I ended up talking for a lot longer than I intended to. And so I think that, like, I don't know. I want people who share my experiences to feel like they can be themselves. I'm still struggling with that myself, but like I'm trying to do a few little things, and this is one of them today. So you've got my mostly unscripted honesty for you here today.
Okay, that's amazing. And I just have to say, I feel like a theme of today's conversation is bravery, just in terms of like everything we've talked about. I love that. Thank you for trying that out. That's awesome. And respect for both approaches. Because I think they're both authentic. They essentially must be, because you're bringing your whole self to the table. But kudos to you for being so taking this step into the unknown with this interview. It's a great honor for us too. So cool. Christina, did you have anything to add before we let Sylvie get on with her evening?
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Sylvie, for sharing your stories, for sharing them not only on the page, but with us here today. And for anyone who is interested in reading Sylvie's amazing book, we'll have a link down below in the show notes. There we go. Beautiful cover to match a beautiful story. So we'll have a link below for anyone who wants to pick that up. We highly encourage it. It's even if you're not into OCD or neurodivergence or whatever the case, it's just a great book. So people should pick that up if they want. So thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you, Sylvie.